So, James McKeon, does withdrawal from the INF treaty harm US national security interests?
It absolutely does. And what I want to focus on are two main points. And the first point is that it risks an arms race in Europe and potentially in Asia. And it also potentially undermines the future of arms control, particularly the New START treaty, which I know Michaela is not a fan of. And what I want to also focus on is I know what Michaela's arguments will be. She'll make the argument that China is not a party to the treaty, and therefore they have a lot of these missiles that the treaty covered. She'll also make the argument that the Russians are violating the treaty, which is absolutely true, and therefore why should we stay in a treaty that the Russians are violating? If I do my job correctly today, what I will point out is that those arguments seem to make sense on the surface, but when you scratch a little bit deeper, when you dig deeper, you see that those arguments fall apart under scrutiny. At the end of the day, without the INF treaty, we are risking an arms race across the globe, and we are potentially risking the future of arms control writ large.
And Michaela Dodge, how do you respond to that argument?
Well, I wasn't going to mention China in my opening remarks, so no dice there for now anyways. But I do think that withdrawing from an arms control treaty is, from the INF treaty, is in our interest. It does not spell arms race. I mean, for one, Russia is already developing and deploying these systems. So Russia is racing. We are standing by. And despite multiple measures that we've taken, Russia is not coming back into compliance. If we are going to, we both care about arms control, that means we have to be ruthless about non-compliance and about violations. And I do think that withdrawing from the INF treaty is a good step, because with the treaty in effect, we are not going to be able to explore our options to address Russia violations fully. Because treaties limit our ability to learn about systems that they prohibit, and that's the case with the INF treaty for sure. So no, I do not agree that withdrawing from the treaty spells arms race. We withdrew from the ABM treaty before. It did not spell arms race, even though I know that the Russians are not particularly fond of withdrawing from the treaty. I do not think it spells global arms race risk either. Partly because the Russians are going to do what they want to do, what's in their interest to do anyway, and other countries are going to respond regardless of whether there is a piece of paper signed or not.
And what about that point that Russia will do what Russia will do?
Right. So I think the important thing here to recognize is that during the Obama administration, which first made public that the Russians were violating the treaty, and they deployed a missile that's currently deployed called the 9M729. It's a ground-launched intermediate-range cruise missile. And one important part about the treaty that we haven't mentioned yet is that it only covers ground-launched missiles. It doesn't cover air or sea-launched missiles. So the Trump administration, in the fall to winter of 2017, they created a strategy to respond to this, which largely mirrored, actually, the strategy of the Obama administration, put increased pressure on the Russians to try to bring them back into compliance.